I just want to introduce myself. My name is Rohan Mehta. I'm a third-year medical student here at NYU. I see a lot of familiar faces, but if we haven't met before, hi. Really excited to be here to get to talk about something that I'm very passionate about, I've been working on for a while, and this is just practical nutrition counseling for patients. Hope you guys enjoy the lunch, and hope you get to learn something today. All the references that I use in today's talk and on the handouts that you guys should have gotten are available at this link here. This link is also on Brightspace and on the handouts that you guys have. I just want to start with a quote from the father of modern medicine. This is Hippocrates, and he said around 400 BC, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." I think it's pretty crazy how even then, millennia ago, what we eat was considered an important part of how we managed medical problems. This was relevant then and probably more relevant than ever today. So fast forward to the modern age. Currently, poor diet is considered the leading risk factor for death worldwide. Point blank period. It surpasses even tobacco use. This is true worldwide and in the United States, where currently 60% of Americans live with one or more chronic diet-related diseases. Upwards of 90% of American healthcare dollars are spent on the treatment of chronic diet-related disease. However, most of these patients actually don't report receiving any nutrition counseling from their doctor. And it goes without saying that most patients won't have the opportunity to see a nutritionist or dietitian in their lifetime. So there's a huge gap here, right? And I think solving this problem really comes down to you and me and the next generation of physicians. If you let me argue for a moment, most of us are going to be directly treating in our practices a lot of diseases that cannot be fully managed without dietary modification. Examples are hyperlipidemia, hypertension, cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, stroke, fatty liver, and the list goes on. Some of our most common diseases, in short. If you're the type of doctor who is not going to be directly managing one of these diseases, you almost certainly will regularly manage patients who have one of these comorbid conditions, right? Remember, this is 60 to 85% of our patient population. All of us will be managing on a nearly daily basis the downstream effects of these diseases. So for example, maybe you're like an orthopedic surgeon and you're treating knee arthritis. Well, we know that that, of course, is related to obesity. Or perhaps you're an ophthalmologist, you're treating diabetic retinopathy, which is a leading cause of blindness in the developed world. Or even a general surgeon who treats gallstones with cholecystectomies. We know that gallstones are, of course, related to obesity. There are many such examples of this. And stepping outside of the office, I'm sure many of you guys have already had the experience of being asked by friends and family what they should be eating. And all of us have seen nutrition misinformation on the internet regularly. So in the modern age, I think being able to speak confidently and intelligently about nutrition is a key competency for a physician. The good news is that counseling on lifestyle change turns out to be really high value. For example, counseling on tobacco cessation. For every patient you meet who smokes, if you simply tell them they ought to quit smoking and that would be good for their health, 2% of patients will quit just from that advice. And it's the most cost-effective intervention that we have in modern medicine. More cost-effective than prescribing statins or prescribing antihypertensives, doing cancer screening or vaccination. This costs around $2,000 per year of life saved, whereas those other interventions can cost tens of thousands of dollars per year of life saved. And while we don't have the same kind of research yet on counseling for diet change, a lot of smaller studies do show that limited nutrition counseling does result in improved metabolic markers and weight loss and improved diet in the long term. And this makes sense, right? Because like I mentioned earlier, something like 60 to 85% of our patient population has a diet-related chronic disease, and the vast majority of them have never received any counseling about it. So there's a lot of low-hanging fruit here. And if you reach for that fruit, maybe you could totally change someone's life. While Americans cite their doctor as their leading source of nutrition, most of us actually get very little training on this topic. Doctors average around 19 hours of nutrition training over the course of medical school, and then 5 hours clinically. And most of this is biochemistry, vitamin deficiencies, stuff that you'll see on step 1, but maybe not the most common nutrition-related problem that people suffer from in the US. I thought this was pretty crazy. 90% of cardiologists report receiving little to no nutrition education and fellowship. You guys are in your cardiology block right now, so I don't have to tell you. What we eat has a huge impact on cardiovascular outcomes. Earlier this year, one of my colleagues, Lauren Rice, she's a student here, did a survey on our clerkship students and found that they rated their knowledge and abilities with respect to nutrition to be relatively low. Very few report having any nutrition education, yet overwhelmingly, our students agree that nutrition knowledge is important and should be taught in med school. When asked what they wanted to learn more about, the most common request was increased education on nutrition counseling. And so that brings us to today. My hope is that through this talk, you guys can learn a thing or two about what you could say on bedsides or what you could say next year as a clerkship student to patients. Realize that as a medical student, you're going to be the person on your team who usually has the most time to go back and spend with patients for education and patient counseling. So you should really take advantage of that. In brief, here's what we're going to cover today. First, we're going to talk about how to do counseling if you have the ideal amount of time. Then we'll talk about maybe the 10 most important things that you want your patient to understand about nutrition. And finally, we'll talk about what you should do when you really don't have time for counseling. First, let's just touch on some counseling communication strategies. For this, I just want you guys to think back to the motivational interviewing lecture you had earlier this year from Dr. Moore. Some important points here. First, you should ask permission to talk about the topic. A lot of times patients will say they don't really want to talk about this today, and that's okay. Just bring it up the next time you see them. Using ask, tell, ask, and open-ended questions, you guys know this. This is a great way to get a lot of information quickly, and when you're talking about nutrition counseling, you're probably going to be strapped for time. This is also a great way to avoid patients kind of telling you what they think you want to hear. I like to really personalize the risk to their situation. So for example, if you have a patient with diabetes, you could sort of vaguely explain to them how what they eat affects the control of their diabetes, or you could personalize it by saying, for instance, I'm concerned that having ice cream as frequently as you're having is part of your worsening blood sugar control and contributing to the diabetic retinopathy that you've been experiencing. So would you be open to talking about some food switches so we could try to protect your vision in the long term? When you personalize risk in this way, it makes the discussion much more honest and really impactful. I like to also use positive affirmations as a way to increase self-efficacy for my patients. So I'll praise any positive changes that they have made. This allows me to show genuine caring and respect, and also strengthens my relationship with them as their caregiver. And it makes them more amenable to change in the long term and more amenable to continuing with the changes that they've already made. Summarizing and reflective statements are a great way to show active listening and also sort of restate what your patient is saying and frame it in an optimistic way. So the steps of this longer form of dietary counseling are as follows. First, we do a 24-hour diet recall. So this consists of asking your patient what they ate yesterday, including all meals, all snacks, and all drinks, and you'll ask for these things one by one. Some key points here. You want to ask about drinks because often this is a source of a lot of added calories that people will miss if you don't ask about this specifically. And also, you want to ask what they ate yesterday rather than what they eat typically, because when you ask them what they eat typically, they're going to sort of self-edit and tell you what they think you want to hear. And we'll come back to this 24-hour diet recall shortly. The second step is, based on this 24-hour diet recall, you're going to kind of take that as an opportunity and exercise to discuss things that could be improved with your patient. And this is a way to kind of get them into the mindset of thinking in a nutritionally positive attitude. So let's kind of work on this together right now. A little more background, this patient, he's a 57-year-old Bengali man. He has a history of hypertension, hyperlipidemia with vitals and lipid panel today that's consistent with that diagnosis. He lives in Queens. He says he drives a cab and presents for a routine checkup, working long hours and reporting increased fatigue over the last few months. His diet is high in convenience store and restaurant foods, partially because of his career. And so this is his 24-hour diet recall. What are some things, just raise your hand and tell me, what are some things that you would like to see change here or some things that could be areas of improvement? Yeah. Grilled fish instead of fried fish? Great, really good. That's true. There's definitely space to increase fiber intake. Yeah. Yeah, so I'm hearing reduce different strategies for reducing added sugar. Yeah, go ahead.
Am I crazy? Like, this doesn't seem that bad. Like, he eats better than I do. That's damn good.
It's not bad. It's not bad. There's definitely things that we can improve, but there's also a lot of strengths, right? So all really great answers, and I think there's a lot of things that you could a lot of ways you could go with this. Here's what I did. So for breakfast, he says that he has a bagel with cream cheese and chai with sugar. I'm going to say, instead of having a bagel, let's have the whole grain version of that. And then instead of cream cheese, maybe like a nut butter or avocado or a light cream cheese. And the chai, let's just make sure there's like only 1 or 2 spoons of sugar in it. So what I've done here is I've increased his whole grain intake. I've increased, or I've used this as an opportunity to add a vegetable or a nut to his breakfast, and I've reduced added sugar. Some other tweaks, he says that for his snacks throughout the day are beef jerky and a Chobani cup. I'm going to suggest instead like mixed nuts or an apple or a zero sugar version of the Chobani cup. This is because a lot of times those prepackaged cup yogurts have a ton of added sugar, so the zero sugar version is a really great alternative if that's what he likes to eat. Also using this as an opportunity to add in a fruit or a nut because he's really not having any fruits throughout his day. He doesn't have lunch. This can be a problem because sometimes when patients skip a meal, they'll like overcompensate by eating too much at a later meal or really binging when it comes to snack time. So eating consistently is a great way to manage weight. And I'm going to use this as a chance to add in some vegetables and some legumes with his lunch. I'm suggesting a wrap because I think maybe one of the reasons he's skipping lunch is because he drives throughout the day, he maybe doesn't have time to stop and eat. And so something he can grab out of the fridge in the morning and eat like with one hand while driving would probably be ideal for this gentleman. This is his dinner. I think his dinner is good, but there are a few adjustments we could make to kind of make it a little bit better. First, I would focus on like portion sizes. So I would reduce the portion size of the fish and the rice in place of increasing the portion size of the dal and the cucumber. Frying the fish, we can maybe like bake it instead. And then for the white rice, we could replace the white rice with brown rice or add quinoa as a way to increase his whole grains at this meal. And then finally, or I guess before I talk about drinks, for dessert, he says he has a scoop of ice cream. That's fine. This is probably going to be the hardest sell, but maybe instead of having that ice cream, he has whatever his favorite fruit is for dessert. I want to use this as a chance to get fruit in because he's just not eating enough right now. And then in terms of drinks, I notice he's just not drinking enough water. Maybe it's because he has a job where he can't stop and use the restroom very easily, so he's just like sort of limiting his fluid intake. I want to really make sure he has enough water. So I'm going to say 1.5 liters of water. And instead of the iced tea, the Arizona iced tea, which can sometimes have like 50 grams of sugar per serving, let's try the unsweetened version if he likes that. Now, this is a lot of changes. Am I going to recommend all of these things to him? Probably not. If you make too many recommendations at once, patients will kind of shut down and won't do any of it. But this is like an exercise so we can kind of think about nutrition and how to design a healthful diet with the patient. And then based on this, I'm going to pick a couple of goals with him, goals that he feels are reasonable, and then we'll proceed forward with those. But before we get there, let's step back a little bit and talk about the context that really matters when you're providing patient education on nutrition. First, patients shouldn't feel blamed, right? Let's be honest, eating healthy is very difficult in the modern age. There's so many things that are in the way. People don't have time, people don't have access to groceries, people maybe have never learned how to cook or never really learned how to design a healthful diet. And then there's all kinds of marketing pushing like fast food on us, right? Also, a lot of times people with like a larger body habitus may feel like sort of this pressure where people perceive that they're not eating healthy. And we have to recognize that obesity, when it comes to obesity, there are a lot of uncontrollable genetic factors, uncontrollable social determinants of health that play a large role. So patients really shouldn't feel blamed when you're counseling them because while all this is true, making some dietary changes can actually still reduce future disease risk. So the approach here is, look, I understand that some of these things are not totally in your hands, whether we're talking about risk for obesity or social determinants that make it hard to eat healthy, but what do you say we work together to reduce your disease risk as best as we can and find something that works for you? I also really try to focus on framing my counseling as let's add in nourishing foods rather than let's remove quote unquote bad foods. This is better for long-term adherence. It's also better for having a secure emotional attachment to food. And especially when you are counseling children or people with a history of prior disordered eating, you definitely don't want to create an additional problem through the way you counsel. Some other things to think about is you want to try to make it as easy as possible to choose the healthy option for your patient, right? So we can do this by manipulating our environment, by limiting the availability of ultra-processed snacks at home, or increasing the visual availability and accessibility of healthy options, like leaving bowls of pre-cut fruit or vegetables accessible in our space. Also, as I touched on earlier, not skipping meals. This is a great way to make sure you're managing what you eat and having a regular portion when it comes to mealtime. Similarly, you can have like a piece of fruit or a salad or soup before your main meal, and this is an easy way to sort of reduce your portion when it comes to mealtime. I would really strongly encourage you to think in terms of harm reduction. A lot of times patients will not be willing to make all the changes you suggest, and that's okay. There's no reason to not address the changes that they're still open to. Try to understand their preferences and needs and cater your advice to this. So for example, sometimes patients will cite time as an obstacle, right? So talking about meal prepping techniques or making overnight oats or using certain appliances like a rice cooker or an air fryer that cuts down on cooking time, relying more on frozen fruits and vegetables and canned legumes. These are great ways to cut down cooking time. Sometimes cultural food preferences can be an obstacle. People don't know how to cook healthy within their cultural context. We'll talk more about that next. And then sometimes finances can be an obstacle. I think when it comes to this, a lot of times you want to, talk about the affordability really of a lot of the whole foods that people have access to. Sometimes the healthiest foods are actually some of the cheapest. In terms of culturally sensitive counseling, in my experience, people will often say things of the effect of, oh my God, like the food that we eat back home, the food I grew up eating is just so bad for you. Like we eat so many carbs and we fry everything. And that's just not really true, right? I think regardless of what culture you look at, there are going to be some foods that are nutritionally dense and then some foods that are more processed. And it really comes down to paying attention to the relative portioning of those different things in your diet, paying attention to the manner of preparation, like maybe we're going to bake something instead of frying it, or maybe we're going to opt for the skinless version of the poultry instead of the version with the skin. And then I also like to emphasize the exploration of fruits and vegetables and herbs and spices that are popular within their cultural context, as that's a great way to consume the flavors that you're used to that remind you of home while still eating a healthful diet. If you're going to make patients choose between eating foods that remind them of their cultural identity and eating foods that are healthy, a lot of times patients are going to choose their identity, right? So those things have to go hand in hand. Let's talk briefly about how expensive healthful foods can be. I think a lot of times, especially plant foods, can be very cost effective. I have some examples here. Canned beans and legumes are a great part of an affordable, healthful diet. Root vegetables, nut butters, pantry staples like oats and brown rice, tofu, frozen fruits and vegetables. And here in New York City, we have the green cart system. These are carts, maybe you've seen the one like outside of Target. This is like just subsidized fresh produce, really great way to do your groceries on a budget. And then what do these look like as meals? So for example, you could eat like overnight oats with chia seeds and peanut butter, a tofu Asian stir fry, or a veggie burrito with tofu and potatoes. These are all meals I eat regularly, very meal preppable, cost less than $2 per serving for a 700 to 800 calorie serving, and also have the benefit of having 30 to 40 grams of protein. So I think what this really illustrates is a lot of times some of the most healthful foods out there are very cost effective, and it kind of comes down to whether you have time to cook and if you know where to look. And so now we've done the 24-hour diet recall. We've proposed some adjustments based on that, and we're going to set some goals. That's the next step. So we like to use this format SMART, that's specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound goals. Instead of setting a goal like, I'm going to eat healthier, you want to set a couple of goals with your patients that look like, I will add 1 cup of vegetables to my lunch at least 5 days a week for the next month. Much more sort of specific and measurable in that way. And once you've set goals, you want to make sure you're referring or following up with your patients appropriately. So if you're their PCP and you're going to be seeing them soon, just tell them that you'll check in with their goals 6 to 12 months from now. More than likely, though, you're going to be a student who will never see them again, right? So you want to encourage them to discuss these goals with their PCP at their next visit so that there is some follow-up on that. And I would keep a really low threshold for offering extra support. If they'd like a nutrition referral and it's warranted, make a referral. If they're going to be staying inpatient, like for example, maybe you meet a patient who's here for a heart failure exacerbation and they're just going to be here for a few days as we're giving them diuretics to remove all that fluid. They're just waiting. Just put in a nutrition consult and give them the opportunity to sort of refresh themselves on what they should be eating in the setting of their cardiovascular disease. We also have this amazing lifestyle medicine clinic at Bellevue. It's really a one-of-a-kind thing that exists in New York City, where patients can go through a several week sort of boot camp, learn about what to eat, how to exercise, how to manage sleep and stress. I've referred lots of patients to this as a clerkship student, and they only report good things. So we've talked a little bit about how to do counseling when you have a lot of time. What are like the 10 most important things you want your patient to understand about nutrition? First, you want to emphasize that they eat a diet that's rich in a variety of plant foods. So dietary pattern with lots of plant products, reduced processed foods, reduced animal products, reduced sugar, saturated fat, and sodium is endorsed by basically all clinical practice guidelines and many health authorities, including the ones on this screen. In brief, some benefits of a plant-forward diet is what I'm going to call it. This is the only way of eating that has been shown to actually reverse coronary artery disease, which is our leading killer. This important landmark trial, the Lifestyle Heart Trial, placed patients with a moderate to severe coronary artery disease burden on a lifestyle intervention protocol, including a low-fat, whole food, plant-based diet. They actually had a reduction in stenosis at 5 years. This is the only time a non-pharmacologic and non-invasive modality has been shown to actually reverse coronary artery disease. If you take diabetics and place them on a high-fiber, low-fat diet, they can actually have a remission in their diabetes. And if you give patients with hypertension 8 to 10 servings of fruits and vegetables a day and limit their saturated fat intake, this can reduce systolic blood pressure by 11 points. The Mediterranean, DASH diet, portfolio diet, there's many other diets that also emphasize a mainly plant-forward eating. There's some small differences, but overall they're 95% the same in terms of what you're eating. What is it about plants that seems to have so many benefits? First, plants and only plants have fiber. We'll talk about those benefits soon. Plants also have a variety of micronutrients that provide antioxidant capacity, which reduces your cancer risk and preserves the health of your blood vessels. There are also these electrolytes that promote blood vessel relaxation, hence preventing and treating hypertension. Plant sterols reduce cholesterol absorption, and these micronutrients also signal to the hunger centers of our brain, promoting a sense of fullness, so you eat less food. Unsaturated fats that are found in plants have a favorable impact on lipid profile and insulin resistance. These are like the omega fats that you might have heard of. And plants, of course, are mostly water, so you get all the benefits of hydration and feeling more full when you eat more plants. Point number 2 goes really well with point number 1, and this is just avoid ultra-processed foods. I'm talking about here like packaged snacks, sugary treats, fast foods, and refined grains. You can think about food as sort of existing on a spectrum of whole to ultra-processed, and as you move along that spectrum, there are a variety of processes that oftentimes remove fiber, protein, water, vitamins and minerals, and add in sugar, fat, and sodium. Of course, this is sort of a generalization, but this is kind of the rationale for why we should eat less ultra-processed foods and eat more whole foods. A lot of times when you go through this processing, you end up with food that has lower nutritive value and provides less fullness, while often being higher calorie. Point number 3, rather than counting calories, you should emphasize to their patients that they should prioritize a whole, minimally processed diet. And this is because calorie counting is difficult, it's unsustainable, and people are just bad at it. On the other hand, if you eat a diet that's mostly fresh fruits, vegetables, legumes, and lean proteins, this will be naturally low in calorie density, and it'll be very satiating due to the water and the fiber and the micronutrients. And if you do this, you should just track weight over time to make sure that their weight trend is as expected, that they're not losing weight unexpectedly. The image on the bottom really kind of illustrates the difference in a low versus high calorie density diet. On the left side, high calorie density. On the right side, low calorie density. You can see it looks like almost 3 times as much food. And this is the power of sort of eating in this way. Point number 4, try to cook more at home if you can, recognizing, of course, not everyone has this luxury, right? Not everyone has access to a kitchen or knows how to cook or has access to fresh groceries. But if you make more of your food at home, you can control the ingredients, control portion sizing, and most importantly, avoid added fat and sodium that often comes in foods not prepared at home. And unsurprisingly, if you cook more of your food at home, this lowers your risk for type 2 diabetes and cardiovascular disease. Point number 5, choose healthy drinks. So prioritize drinking water, unsweetened tea, or sugar-free beverages. This is especially important because a lot of times soda, fruit juice, and alcohol can carry a lot of excess calories that people sort of ignore or are not aware of. I'm putting fruit juice on here as well because while we think of fruit juice as being a healthier drink, a lot of times you're removing almost all of the fiber. So you're drinking this beverage that has a lot of sugar, but it provides almost no fullness because there's no fiber, right? And for that reason, it can become a source of a ton of extra calories that provide no fullness, right? A spoonful of sugar in your tea or coffee is totally fine, right? A packet or 2. This is not nearly the same as the amount of sugar you're gonna see in like a Coca-Cola or a glass of fruit juice. Staying hydrated is super important. This is because thirst is very often mistaken for hunger. So Staying hydrated helps with appetite control. We recommend 60 ounces of water per day. And then let's talk about fibers. Let's talk about fiber specifically. This is one of my favorite points. Only 5% of Americans reach their recommended daily intake of fiber. That means 95% of Americans are not eating enough plants. You guys have heard, obviously, about how fiber helps with bowel health and regularity, but the benefits don't just stop there. Fiber does a ton of things in our body. Fiber supports gut bacteria, and gut bacteria, of course, have a ton of metabolic roles in our body. Fiber slows down digestion, which supports satiety and fullness and weight management. Fiber slows down our absorption of carbohydrates, which reduces glucose spikes and helps with diabetes management. Fiber lowers cholesterol by binding to it and removing it via the gut. And because of all these benefits, fiber ends up reducing our risk for heart disease, stroke, type 2 diabetes, colorectal cancer, and actually all-cause mortality. There's this huge meta-analysis that looked at 1 million patients and found that every 10 gram per day increase in fiber intake corresponds to a 10% reduction in risk of all-cause mortality. Whole grains specifically, eating more whole grains is associated with a reduced risk of mortality due to cardiovascular disease. And let's talk about whole grains, because I think there's a lot of confusion about this topic. When I say whole grains, I'm talking about whole wheat, oats, corn, brown rice, barley, quinoa, and others. Whole grains have 3 parts. There's this outer layer called bran that has fiber, vitamins, and minerals. The inner endosperm is kind of the starchy component of the grain. And then there's a part called the germ that has B and E vitamins and healthy fats. Refined grains like white rice or white flour remove the bran and germ, so you lose the vast majority of fiber and micronutrients in the product. So when you're shopping for bread in the bread aisle, I would look for the word whole in the ingredients. If you buy whole grain wheat flour or whole wheat, this is going to have the benefits of whole grains, whereas wheat, multigrain, organic flour, enriched flour will not have the same benefits. And then sodium intake. Limiting sodium intake is super important because high sodium intake contributes to hypertension and hence all the cardiovascular downstream issues of hypertension. 71% of sodium in our diet comes from food that you purchase from outside the home. This is because sodium makes food taste better, so restaurants put a lot of sodium in our food, and sodium also helps keep food fresh, so they put a lot of sodium in foods that need to be shelf stable, right? So another reason to cook most of your food at home. Also, think about flavoring your food with herbs, spices, and chilies when you're cooking at home so you're not relying overly on sodium for flavor. Point number 8, practicing portion awareness. This is a particularly helpful way to do portion awareness training for patients who haven't thought about this before. Your plate should really look like half non-starchy vegetables, half fiber-rich carbohydrates, so like whole grains or like corn or potatoes, and then a quarter of your plate should be some form of a lean protein. Point number 9, reading labels. So I'm not going to go super into detail on this because there's a little handout that talks about how to read labels in like thoroughly, but let's talk about this like Cliff Bar label for a second. What are some things that you guys notice or are surprised about when you read this label? What's that? Yeah, the first ingredient is sugar. Exactly. The first ingredient is organic brown rice syrup. It's like they included the organic in the brown rice to make me think that it was good for me, but then they followed it with syrup, right? And I think it's interesting how like the label for this product has like a guy climbing a cliff. It's sort of marketed as this health food, and it's probably great if you need a short burst of energy if you're like rock climbing or something, but should you be having this for breakfast every day? Probably not. In terms of reading labels, some important things to think about. Make sure you're checking the serving size. A lot of times, stuff will say like, oh, serving size half a bar. Well, now I have to double every number on this because I'm not eating half a Cliff Bar, right? And then sometimes, or something else to pay attention to is the ingredient label, right? Because the ingredient label will be in order of quantity. So if the first ingredient or second ingredient is some form of sugar, oil, or refined flour, probably something to avoid. Or maybe it's like a pastry and you know that's what it is and that's what you want, that's fine, right? Just something to be thinking about. Let's talk about this one. What do you guys notice when you look at this label? Any thoughts? Yeah.
It's like 1.5 Cokes right there.
Yeah, 53 grams of sugar. And this one too is marketed as a health product. It's called Green Machine. There's all these pictures of fruits and there's like kale on the front. And then there's 53 grams of sugar with no dietary fiber. I think you're much better off buying those vegetables and fruits yourself and blending them up and making that smoothie. Because without that fiber, your body's just gonna run right through that and feel just as hungry in a few minutes. Yeah, what's up? I mean, this is like better to drink than like a Coca-Cola, right? Because there's a little bit of protein, and then there's like the vitamins and minerals. Like, I'm not saying fruit juice is equivalent, but yeah, like if there are 53 grams of sugar and no fiber to slow down the absorption of that sugar, your body's really going to treat it the same way as it would treat added sugar. Yeah, what's up? That might be. I'm not totally sure about that. But that's interesting. Yeah, I'll have to look into that. Yeah, what's up? I mean, I think it's like, the point of this bar is like, you need a quick burst of energy. You're like low on energy and you need to perform, right? So I would just think about it in those terms. Okay, moving on, just in the interest of time. The last point I want to make is thinking about sustainable lifestyle change over dieting is key, right? The biggest obstacle you're going to run into when it comes to talking about any form of lifestyle modification is adherence. So you really want to prioritize gradual and consistent changes that are more effective in the long term rather than overly strict short-term diets. So recognize your patient is really not going to stick to any recommendation you make if they don't enjoy that recommendation. So I talk to my patients about exploring plant-forward meals, try new fruits and vegetables, try new whole grains, try new herbs and spices, find what you like. Because if you are trying to force yourself to eat something you don't like to eat, that's not going to like stick in the long term. And don't deprive yourself of the occasional treat. If you need to have, you know, an ice cream bar or whatever a couple times a week, but you're eating really well 95% of the time, that's a huge win. So think in those terms. Finally, let's talk about some of the things that you can say when you really don't have time to do this whole counseling session. And that's the situation you're probably going to find yourself in most of the time, right? Here's sort of the steps, and I'm going to take us through like an example. Let's say you are an emergency medicine physician, okay? And you meet this patient, you're treating them because they had like an ankle fracture or something, they're in the ED, and they tell you offhand that they've also really been struggling with like feeling really fatigued because of their sleep apnea, but they haven't had a chance to talk to a doctor about it yet. You could say something along the lines of step one, hey, has anyone talked to you before about how the food choices you make may help with the control of your sleep apnea? They may say something like, yeah, you know, doc, like I've heard before that obesity is part of like sleep apnea symptoms, but I haven't really thought all that much about it. You can say, yeah, that's exactly right. You got it, right? Obesity is definitely something that contributes to sleep apnea, and the reason for that is having excess like weight around your neck is something that compresses on your airway when you're sleeping, makes it harder to get enough air. Thankfully, losing weight seems to be one of many great treatments for sleep apnea. Would you be interested in speaking to a nutritionist so you can learn more? And then from there, you can make a nutrition referral. Remember that nutritionists will get 30 to 60 minutes to talk about this with each patient. I just did this in 1 or 2 minutes, but if you really use that tool, you could potentially make a huge impact in this man's quality of life. So I would not hesitate to try this out. I'm going to talk briefly about resources for more. The PCRM Nutrition Guide for Clinicians is a really great resource. It's a little booklet. There's free copies of this in the dungeon downstairs. Nutritionfacts.org is a source that I go to a lot. There's a lot of short form videos that talk about various trials in nutrition. Here at NYU, we have a culinary medicine elective that I'll talk about soon. We also have a lifestyle medicine interest group that I, along with some of the other students, run. We would love to see you at our events. We talk about a variety of lifestyle issues, whether it's nutrition or exercise or sleep or stress. Here at New York City Health and Hospitals, we have a lifestyle medicine program, a really wonderful, one-of-a-kind thing that I'll talk about soon. And if you're interested in learning more about these different topics that we talked about today, all of those sources are at this link that is also on your handout. Speaking of the handouts, everything we talked about today is summarized in these handouts. There is one handout that covers sort of the counseling protocol for dietary modification. another one that talks about why we need education on nutrition in med school, little handout on more of a deeper dive on how to read a nutrition label, and then finally those top 10 high yield points that we discussed earlier. This is that culinary medicine elective that I was telling you guys about. It's a 4-week elective where you get to work in a test kitchen, learn how to cook. Includes a variety of lectures on the topic of nutrition, and you get to learn how to cook from professionals at the NYU downtown campus. Really cool elective. I'm taking it next semester, very excited for it. And then here, NYC H+H, we have this lifestyle medicine program. It's a really cool program where patients with risk factors for lifestyle disease, for diet-related disease, can go through a series of individual visits, sort of a boot camp with physicians, dietitians, health coaches, exercise coaches. They can learn how to exercise, they can learn how to design a healthful diet, learn how to manage stress and sleep. I've put in referrals for several patients to explore this option. And Dr. Shah runs the program here at Bellevue. If you guys have more questions, she's sitting in the dock. Some take-home messages from today. First, poor diet is a leading risk factor for death in the world and in the United States. Most of your patients will have one or more diet-related medical problems. Food choices are among the most important health decisions that we make. Nutrition science has so much more consensus than controversy about what we should be eating, right? Dietary counseling is really effective, but it tends to be underused right now. So you should really try to use this alongside the various other tools that you have. Try your best to make change easy for your patient. You can do this by tailoring your advice to their life context, their readiness, their preferences, their budget, their cultural context, and try to encourage gradual shifts rather than perfection. Emphasize a long-term plant-forward diet with fewer ultra-processed foods. When possible, try to do a 24-hour diet recall, set some SMART goals, and then refer or follow up appropriately. If you're short on time, look at those top 10 key tips that we talked about and try to give them a few of those key tips and then talk about the other ones the next time you see them. And most importantly, physicians do not need to be able to do all of their own counseling, but they must recognize the role of diet in disease. They must be able to communicate this role clearly via brief counseling, and then they should be able to refer their patients appropriately. Special thanks to Dr. Shaw, Dr. Webster, Dr. Gillespie for helping me put this talk together and be able to stand up here and talk about this, and some of my classmates who also referred or reviewed some of these slides with me and offered advice. And with that, I just want to open it up for questions for the next few minutes. I have to take a picture. Any questions? Yeah, what's up?
What do you think is like the best way to like open this conversation with the patient in a way that like doesn't make them feel judged, but maybe like
Sure. I think you should try to make it specific to their condition. So say you're meeting a patient with like diabetes. So you could say like, hey, I'd love to talk a little bit more about some nutrition changes that we could make to help with your control of your diabetes. Would you be open to talking about that today?
what if it's like a patient that doesn't have any underlying health conditions yet, but might be like overweight or like at risk for certain conditions?
Okay. Yeah, I think like generally speaking, you should just try to ask for permission as a way to like open the conversation. Yeah, is that helpful? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, well, I'll be up here if anyone has any further questions. Before you guys leave, I have this link to a research survey. This is totally optional. It doesn't go to the school or anything. It's just for my own research that I'm doing. This link is also going to be sent to you guys via email and is also found at the bottom of your handouts. And I'll be here for the next 20 minutes if anyone has anything to ask. Thank you guys so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you guys, talk about something I'm really passionate about. Best of luck with the cardiology module and whatever comes next for everyone. Thank you.